Rey continued. Rey and Finn engaged again, this time flinging rocks at the figure. The figure balked at their attempt at creating an opening. Strike after strike, the figure parried with relative ease. Rey switched to Anakin's Form 5 overhead strike, while Finn lunged with a forward stab. The figure...
You have a long way to go before you can call yourself a warrior, young one.
The hood was blown off by the wind as the figure's cloak flowed with the throws, revealing an ancient Mandalorian helmet. Bo-Katan sat up in utter disbelief.
It can't be.
The figure... Bo-Katan's expression shifted from paranoia to sheer terror as her eyes met with Sabine's.
Tar Vizsla.
Echoes of the Past, Chapter 3. Sabine jumped up, knocking Finn backward in the process.
That can't be.
Sabine shouted, mouth agape.
How is that even possible?
I don't know.
Bo-Katan lowered her head.
But I'm sure of it. The Force, the Darksaber, the helmet.
Sabine rushed to a nearby post and leaned against it with her head in her hands. She certainly didn't anticipate this is how her day would be going. A routine checkup on the mining facility, she thought. Maybe the transponders malfunctioned, but who was she kidding? Everyone was gone without a trace. Unexplainable residual biomatter. This was at least partially the truth she had to accept, for now. She was taken back to the day when Tristan had shown her Tar Vizsla's statue, where she had resolved, at least from then on, she would strive to be every bit as Mandalorian as the figure carved into that rock. Chewie barked sympathetically towards Sabine.
Sabine, I know that you're skeptical, but...
Who is Tar Vizsla?
Finn interjected.
He was...
Bo-Katan hung her head in deep thought.
Mandalore. And the first Mandalorian to be inducted into the Jedi Order.
Jedi? Isn't he an ally?
He was.
Sabine inserted herself.
But from the looks of it, we don't know what he is. It should be physically impossible for him to be alive now. That was thousands of years ago.
Okay, I guess I'll say it. Cloning?
Finn retreated with both his arms up as if pitching the idea to prospective buyers. No one bit. They all gave Finn the side-eye.
I had to.
Finn dropped his arms and rested them on his hips and sighed.
Look, how can we even know that's actually him? The Tar Vizsla.
Finn paced back and forth, gesturing to the others as if he had prepared some lengthy lecture. He motioned as if to present a holovid behind him.
That was thousands of years ago. As you said. One look and you're sure that's the guy?
Sabine shook her head and ruffled her already disheveled hair.
I don't know anymore.
Bo-Katan stood up and meandered to Sabine's side, placing her hand on Sabine's shoulder.
I do.
As if in the same fashion as Finn's presentation, Bo-Katan addressed everyone in monologue.
The use of the Force, the unparalleled martial discipline, the helmet.
Bo-Katan paused and shuddered at the thought of describing one of Mandalore's most ancient monoliths.
There are many things we prescribe in historical studies on Mandalore. Mandalore the Great, the Ultimate, the Preserver, the Mandalorian Civil Wars, and Tar Vizsla. That helmet most of all was unique to him. We hold that item so sacrosanct that no Mandalorian dare fashion a helmet in its likeness.
Finn stepped forward.
So, what if the helmet was stolen?
You don't understand. That helmet was lost over 1,000 years ago. When Tar Vizsla fell, his Beskar armor was sealed in the Sundari Collective, and the Darksaber kept in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. As far as the Darksaber, we know what happened. But his armor, we would know if the Collective was trespassed.
Well, I hate to tell you, but all vaults can be broken into. It's the history of... vaults, I think.
Finn tried to improvise a rebuttal to Bo-Katan's seemingly flimsy affirmations. Bo-Katan continued.
No Mandalorian has set foot inside that vault ever since. Not even the Empire could get in. A vault made of pure Beskar alloy, accessible only to the wielder of the Darksaber.
Sabine leaned forward.
But you lost the Darksaber, Bo.
Bo-Katan sighed and glanced at Sabine with an almost steadfast and rigid confidence.
You don't get it. The wielder must open it. With the Force.
You mean to tell me...
Finn was cut short.
It was a Jedi Master.
Bo-Katan contemplated and paused in deep thought for a moment.
Nakata, I think, was his name. He oversaw the sealing of Tar Vizsla's armor inside the Collective. The Mandalorians at the time would not part with the armor, and the Jedi sought to keep Tar's personal effects at the temple. The Order agreed to relinquish the armor to the Mandalorians in exchange that it be sealed.
Bo-Katan shrugged, exiting a trance-like state from which she recalled her history lessons as a child.
That was what we were taught, at least.
So there's a chance still that all the stories and tales in the history books are just false? We could have an imposter on our hands.
Sabine chimed in. Finn, caught in a sudden epiphany, shot up and resolved himself.
Whatever the case may be, this guy knows how to fight and knows the Force. And he certainly knows how to wield that darksaber. Imposter or not, he's a threat.
Rey sat in her quarters, looking down at her lightsaber, bisected at the hilt from her fight with Tar. It was only a few years ago that she had completed its construction. Thankfully, the kyber crystal remained unscathed. She had discovered it while excavating a kyberite mine hidden beneath a ruined CR-90 Corvette from the Galactic Civil War on Megiddo. The Song of the Crystal had led her to the planet. Kyber crystals were exceedingly rare now. With half of the planets that produced kyber crystals obliterated by the Empire, she felt powerless without her saber. It was a feeling she had forgotten after she had destroyed Sidious. Poe sat on the stool, dejected. His friends were in a pinch, and he could do nothing but play politics with the idle minds of those he had gone to battle with. BB-8 chirped beside Poe. Rose tried her best to console him, but she was also feeling the same pain. She was worried about Finn, his journey as a Skywalker, and how much she had missed him.
What are we gonna do, Rose?
I don't think there's anything we can do, short of rebelling.
Rose shrugged it off and took another shot. BB-8 chirped at Rose as she smiled in agreement.
Rebelling.
Poe smirked at the thought.
Seems like that's what it always comes down to when our friends are in trouble.
The GD's trying its best, Poe. This is the first time in a long time that we've had the opportunity to rebuild without the Phantom Emperor looming over our shoulder.
I know.
Poe took another sip.
I still can't believe it.
Sometimes I wish we could keep this peace, but also go back to the days where we could just hop in our ships and ride the stars. Kind of like how Lando lives.
Rose took a sip of her hooch. Poe lifted his head suddenly.
That's it.
BB-8 chirped in surprise.
Huh?
Rose looked at Poe, confused.
Lando!
Poe gulped down the last of his drink and pat Rose on the shoulder.
Gotta go.
Poe bolted out of the bar.
Come on, buddy.
BB-8 strolled enthusiastically after Poe. Rose's eyes followed Poe until he was gone, and then turned back to her drink, still confused.
I wonder what that means. Well, it's just me and you, Mr. Drink.
Rose chugged down the rest and called for the barkeep to refill her glass. But as much as Rose tried to wax the glory days of the Resistance, being a part of an official galactic government changed everything. Poe was right. They couldn't help their friends as much as they wanted to. As the barkeep refilled her hooch, Rose began circulating thoughts about what she would have done had they still been a part of a resistance. On one hand, there was peace. On the other, there was war. The thought of tightening your bootstraps and heading off into battle for the sake of your friends was more urgent in those days. But the galaxy had more pressing concerns. Political concerns. Bureaucratic concerns. At least more pressing than this one looks at the outset. Rose nursed her drink for a few hours, staring up the broadcasts of the populist Prime Senator Laurel Frey, speaking of a landmark bill that would return the capital of the government to Coruscant after decades of turmoil. She looked down at the last of her drink and scored the edges of her glass with her finger. The landing on Octo was filled with a deep, somber tone. Everyone had settled into their huts, speaking little to each other. Rey had set up in her hut and shut herself inside. After the others had settled into their own lanai huts, they emerged together and sat around a bonfire in the middle of the settlement as Finn regaled the fight to Chewie R2.
He was powerful.
Finn recalled.
I could feel the pressure coming off of him.
Bo-Katan chimed in.
Tar Vizsla was a special warrior. From what I read in the history books, Mandalorians weren't accepted into the Jedi Order, given the storied history between our people, and now he has it again.
Sabine looked up.
The darksaber.
Yes. By all rights, it is his.
Bo-Katan shook her head.
The question is it really him?
Sabine proposed.
Are you still on about this imposter idea, Ren?
Bo-Katan replied. Finn was perplexed, but also curious. The tension between Sabine and Bo-Katan was tightening. He thought he should pivot.
So did this guy come back to reclaim Mandalore?
We don't know.
Bo-Katan looked off into the sky.
Well, I don't buy it. Just because there's no explanation doesn't mean that is the explanation.
Sabine balked at Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan recoiled.
Neither of us were around at the time, so none of us could know for sure if that is the real Tar Vizsla.
Tristan inserted.
One thing is for sure. He knew our moves. He could use the Force. Better than even Rey.
Finn gathered.
For all intents and purposes, I'm treating him like the real deal.
The only problem is, if he is the real deal, what is his purpose? And will the warrior clans of Mandalore embrace him?
Bo-Katan questioned.
Kryze, we've worked for far too long for peace for our people. We can't let this lunatic start an uprising,
Sabine replied. Sen Rao had returned from setting up his hut in the settlement and rejoined the group at the bonfire. As if holding a ticking seismic charge in his hand, he hesitated, then proceeded.
I'm afraid it's too late.
Sen? What have you heard?
Sabine asked.
While you were investigating the mine, I went to consult with the other warrior clans. I arrived at Sundari to find that they had all gathered.
Bo-Katan dropped her head into her hands.
They were all chanting, Mandalore has returned.
Rao explained.
And we're in a war frenzy.
Sabine sighed.
So we're on our own.
Do you think they knew all along and just played games with us?
Bo-Katan questioned Sabine.
I don't know anymore. I thought the peace that your sister advocated for was more popular among our people.
War is a part of our history and our blood, Miss Wren.
Rao looked up at the sky.
It is an immovable pillar.
We can still keep the peace.
Tristan interrupted.
Optimism suits you, brother.
Sabine replied. Finn stood up and looked at all of them.
Well, if it's peace you want, look no further.
Chewie looked at Finn.
What?
Finn smiled at Chewie. R2 chirped behind them.
I get it, Finn. The new Skywalker Order wants to be peacekeepers. But this is a bit too much for two people. Even if those two people are strong with the Force.
Bo-Katan looked at Finn.
And your other half lost her lightsaber.
She'll fix it. I know she will. It's in her nature to fix things. Besides, there's more than two of us.
Bo-Katan and Sabine looked at each other bemused. Their interests piqued. Did Finn just count them among their ranks? At this juncture, it would make sense. They were all in this together. Or was he alluding to something entirely different? Those thoughts were fleeting. Suddenly, a high-frequency signal came through Sabine's comm on her wrist. She shot up and walked away from the group. As she looked down at her comms, her eyes lit up. She turned back to the group as the others turned their attention to her.
There's still hope.
Rey sat cross-legged inside her hut amidst a waning candle flame. Her eyes were closed. She was trying to reach out to the voices that had guided her throughout these years. But the voices fell silent still. The mysterious Mandalorian had disrupted the flow of the Force. Rey recalled the fight on Concordia, reliving each moment. Tar Vizsla had parried all her attacks, used the Force in ways she had only briefly gleaned from the Jedi scriptures, and routed both her and Finn with little effort. This person fought with the knowledge of the ancient Jedi. His lightsaber form was perfect, undampened by wasteful movement, and exemplified an air of classical duelist training that Rey had never seen. The closest she had come to that was Luke, but even then, Luke's rudimentary recreation of the lightsaber arts was still by the book and had no first-hand tutelage from the masters of old. Looking back at her lightsaber parts, she was taken out of her circular thinking. She glanced at her staff, propped up against the far wall.
I have you still.
Rey got to work planning out the repair of her lightsaber. The kyber crystal was intact. All she needed to do now was to return to her scavenger roots and improvise a new hilt out of her quarterstaff. She had everything she needed to fabricate a new lightsaber. She needed to get herself out of this slump. If she had learned anything from Luke, it was to always be in the moment. She fumbled around in her satchel as bits and bobs scattered across her floor until an old parchment paper fell out. She picked up the parchment.
You again.
She studied the blueprint of her first lightsaber design, a slick double-bladed lightsaber with a hinge in the middle. She abandoned this design when a visage of her darkness dawned it.
I could technically still build you. I have the parts, but it would take the rest of my quarterstaff.
Rey was hesitant to let go of what remained of her life on Jakku. She wasn't tethered to it emotionally, but the quarterstaff had protected her for all those years and had sentimental value. But she had to find new meaning with the relic. So many days and nights with her quarterstaff beside her, all for
1/4 portion.
She imitated Unkar in her mind. A voice came through. Rey gasped and leapt to her feet, looking around, her attention scattered. She left the hut in a panic. As she exited the hut, she found herself in a void. A lightless, colorless vacuum surrounded her.
Hello?
She shouted. The voice came through once more.
I can finally see your surroundings.
She turned around as her gaze locked on another pair of eyes. Eyes she had only dreamt of seeing once more.
Ben.
Rey whimpered.
Rey.
Rey stuttered and jumbled her words.
How are you?
You must overcome this.
The voices have been silent.
Rey was confused.
They aren't silent. They're being silenced. But this fluctuation of energy surrounding the Force at this very moment is allowing me to speak to you.
Rey stepped closer to Ben's apparition and extended her hand to his face. Her hand made contact as Ben clasped her own and cradled it along his cheek. She gasped.
This is the dyad.
Our connection hasn't been broken, Rey.
Ben explained.
I still feel your despair. I see through your eyes. I'm a part of you.
Rey retracted her hand.
I don't know if I can defeat my enemy this time. If the voices are all silent, how can I?
This is nothing new, Rey. You have the power.
He knows our moves, is more knowledgeable in the Force.
Rey.
Ben grabs her face and makes eye contact.
Only you can break through.
How can I? Ben!
Rey is interrupted by Ben's apparition slowly fading into the void. Rey's surroundings slowly morphed from the emptiness to the settlement on Octo. Her interactions with her other half was short but sweet. At the very least, she knew that there was hope. Ben had helped Rey find her resolve. Through the dyad, she was able to finally contact Ben, but it was brief and made temporary by this new menace that had plagued the Force for so long. With newfound purpose, she rushed back into her hut to get to work on her new lightsaber.
What happened, Ren?
Bo-Katan shot up. Sabine's face glowed with anticipation as she stared down at the group camped around the bonfire.
An old friend has made contact.
Bo-Katan stood up.
You're sure?
Finn looked around.
Wait, what's going on?
It's her, isn't it?
Tristan answered. Chewie barked at Finn.
I don't know either, Chewie.
Finn replied. Bo-Katan left the bonfire and stared out into open space from an outcropping.
Prodigal daughter returns.
Rao grinned and laughed to himself as if to express an exaggerated sigh of relief.
R2, what's going on?
R2 chirped at Finn sporadically. Finn turned to Sabine and Bo-Katan and pleaded.
Could you guys fill us in at least?
Sabine turned to Finn.
She was an old friend. We spent months together in wild space.
Bo-Katan added.
She's not someone you trifle with either.
Finn flailed his arms.
Okay, I get it. You're hyping me up, but could you both skip waxing nostalgia and get to it?
Sabine walked up to Finn and put both her hands on his shoulders.
Fulcrum.
I give up.
Finn got up and walked off. R2 chirped at Finn.
Very funny, R2.
Sabine, Bo-Katan, Tristan, and Rao all huddled together and visibly rejoiced at the sound of that word. And just as quickly as they had celebrated, Sabine separated herself from the group to look up at the stars by her lonesome. You found him. You finally found him.